What makes a country a country? Is it having a flag, a military, a seat at the United Nations? If you ask the people of Taiwan or Palestine or Kosovo, the answer might depend on who you ask. And what about places like Somaliland or Transnistria, territories with governments, borders, and even their own passports, but no international recognition? Hey everyone, I'm Noah Zerby, and in this video we're exploring one of the most foundational and surprisingly contested concepts in international relations, the state. We'll explore what it is, how we define it, and why it's not as straightforward as it might seem. While international relations as a field can cover a wide variety of topics, the state is usually taken to be the primary unit of analysis. That is to say, most questions in IR begin with the assumption that the state is the most important actor in global politics. All other actors are usually defined in relation to the state. Indeed, the state is so central to IR as a field that we often take the state for granted, and IR often struggles when exploring questions that are not state-focused. That said, we return to the role and importance of non-state actors later in the course, and we'll consider the historical evolution of the state, that is, where the state comes from and how it emerges and develops into its current form, in a future video. But before we do that, let's start with a fairly simple question. How many states are there in the world today? The answer is far more complicated than we normally consider. The answer we hear most often is 193 because there are 193 member states of the United Nations. But the UN also recognizes the Holy See and Palestine as non-member participant states. So we could say 195. But the member states of the United Nations collectively recognize 201 states. This is because some countries like Abkhazia, the Cook Islands, Kosovo, South Ossetia, Taiwan, and others are recognized by some but not all UN member states. But these countries, Abkhazia, the Cook Islands, and so on, are not themselves members of the United Nations, usually because their membership is opposed by at least one permanent member of the United Nations Security Council with the power to block their application for membership. There are 6 other areas that have declared themselves countries, but do not have diplomatic recognition from any country in the world. These include breakaway regions like the Republic of Somaliland, which declared its independence from Somalia in 1991, and Transnistria, which declared its independence from Moldova in 1990, as well as other regions with a similar status. 206 states compete in the Olympics, and 211 are eligible to compete in the FIFA World Cup. But all of these different numbers raise an important question. Why is there so much confusion about the answer to such a relatively straightforward question? The answer, we'll find, is that it's because the criteria for statehood are political. Let's break that down a little more and think about what makes a state a state. That is, what are the defining features or characteristics of the state? The German sociologist Max Weber defined the state as
the state is a human community that successfully claims a monopoly on the legitimate use of physical force within a given territory.
Now, you should immediately notice that Weber's definition has several elements. A state exists within a given area. That is, it's a territorial entity. It has boundaries and borders that demarcate a physical space. These borders may be, and indeed often are, contested. States fight wars over the control of territories. But control over a territory is a central element of statehood. Second, states have a government, and that government controls the territory through the legitimate use of force when necessary. Or in other words, to be a state, a territory must be controlled by a government that has the ability to claim a legitimate use of force. Third, a state must also have a population or a people who live in that territory controlled by that government. Another way to think about this is that a state is a human community. Without people, you can have territory, land, but you don't have a state. And finally, the government should be recognized by both the population and other states as having the right to rule over that territory. That government has the capacity to enter into relations with other states. We often think of that capacity and right to rule as sovereignty, a concept we explore in another video. Collectively, these 4 criteria, a territorial entity, controlled by a government, and inhabited by a population that exercises sovereignty over that territory, are generally accepted under international law as the defining features of statehood. But these criteria are themselves inherently political. What, for example, constitutes a permanent population or a defined territory, especially in cases where borders are disputed or populations are mobile. And Weber's definition doesn't explicitly address recognition by other states. That issue was taken up more directly under international law, particularly in the 1933 Montevideo Convention on the Rights and Duties of States. Article 1 of that convention specifically defines a state as a person of international law that possesses the following qualifications: a permanent population, a defined territory, a government, and the capacity to enter into relations with other states. In practice, of course, things often look different, and the application of these criteria is often politicized, and recognition by other states is often used as a tool of foreign policy. Article 3 of the Montevideo Convention anticipates this, stating that the political existence of the state is independent of recognition by other states. Even before recognition, the state has a right to defend its integrity and independence, to provide for its conservation and prosperity, and consequently to organize itself as it sees fit, to legislate upon its interests, administer its services, and to define the jurisdiction and competence of its courts. The exercise of these rights has no other limitations than the exercise of the rights of other states according to international law. Indeed, many states satisfy all criteria except for recognition by other states. There are lots of examples of this. Although South Korea is a member of the United Nations, it's not recognized by North Korea. And the reverse is also true. South Korea does not recognize North Korea. Does that mean that North and South Korea are not states? Or what about Palestine, which is a UN observer state rather than a member state, and is recognized by more than 140 other states, but not by the United States, Israel, or a handful of others? And for its part, nearly 40 other states refuse to recognize Israel, though it's a member of the United Nations. Does this mean that Israel is or is not a state? What about Taiwan, which is not a member of the United Nations and is claimed by China as part of its territory, but is recognized by only about a dozen other states? Or what about Abkhazia, which broke away from Georgia in 1999? It's not a UN member and is only recognized by 5 other states, Russia and Venezuela chief among them. This territory is still claimed by Georgia, but is Abkhazia a state? Clearly, recognition by other states is important, but is not by itself definitive of statehood, a fact recognized by Article 3 of the Montevideo Convention we just looked at. The role of recognition in the establishment of states is a central debate in international relations. Specifically, there are 2 approaches to the question of whether recognition by another state can be definitive of statehood. That is, can a state be a state if it's not recognized by other states as such? As we've previously considered, the Montevideo Convention leans towards the declarative theory of statehood. That means if an entity has territory, population, government, and the ability to interact with other states, it should be considered a state even without universal recognition. By emphasizing the capacity to enter into relations with other states rather than recognition by other states itself, the Convention skirts the question of recognition. Indeed, as we've seen in Article 3, the Convention explicitly states that the political existence of states is independent of recognition by other states. For example, Taiwan meets the criteria for statehood outlined in the Montevideo Convention, but its statehood is contested and only a few other countries recognize it. On the other hand, the constitutive theory of statehood maintains that recognition by other states is the defining feature of statehood. That is, statehood must be recognized by other states. That's not to say that the states have to like each other. The United States and Cuba, for example, recognize each other without maintaining formal diplomatic relations. The constitutive theory of statehood was most clearly articulated in the final act of the 1815 Congress of Vienna, which recognized 39 sovereign states in Europe and asserted that future states would need to be recognized by those existing states. While this principle was never universally applied, it's nevertheless also implicit in the practice of UN membership, that is, recognition by the United Nations as being a defining feature or characteristic of statehood today. As described by LFL Oppenheim, who is sometimes described as the father of modern international law does not state that a state is not in existence as long as it's not recognized, but it takes no notice of recognition. Through recognition, and exclusively, a state becomes an international person and subject of international law. An example of constitutive theory of statehood in action is provided by Kosovo's declaration of independence from Serbia in 2008. Shortly after doing so, it was recognized by more than 100 UN member states, and this recognition is what granted Kosovo its legal personality in international law. The criteria for statehood are themselves ambiguous, and importantly, statehood is not just a legal concept, it's also deeply political. Each of the examples we've explored in this video, from Palestine to Taiwan, from Abkhazia and South Ossetia to Kosovo, recognition often depends on the politics of the situation. That's it for now. Please leave any questions you have in the comments section below, and thanks for watching.